Hey gamers, Maniac here with GameAccess.net. I got my cup of coffee here because we're going to be giving a bit of a history lesson as well as a look back into a piece of lost media that not only people will not remember, but very few people will actually even know existed. My wife and I went to go see Final Fantasy VII Advent Children in theaters last night. There was a special event going on in anticipation for the second part of the Final Fantasy VII remaster re-release. And as part of the fanfare for this, they put Advent Children as a two-night only theatrical release, which I thought was pretty cool. And my wife got to watch it for the first time, and she got to watch it. And I got to enjoy watching it on the big screen for the first time. And it brought back memories for me about the past of Final Fantasy VII, and specifically a very specific narrow time in the past that a lot of people don't really remember. Now, when Final Fantasy VII first came out, it was considered to be a major system release for the PlayStation 1. And more than that, it actually is considered to be probably one of the most beloved RPGs games of all time. It's that beloved, both by critics, by fans. It's sold tremendously. Unfortunately, I never got a PlayStation 1 copy back in the day. I regret missing out on that one. But that's neither here nor there, and we'll talk about that sort of thing later on. Square Enix did not do re-releases. They did not do, not really. They very rarely ported their games. They very rarely remastered their games. And when a Final Fantasy game was released, that was it. You would not see other games in that universe. The next Final Fantasy game would take place in a completely different universe at a completely different time. But the themes would match, but it would be a different universe, different characters, that sort of thing. That started changing around the time Final Fantasy X came out, when Square Enix finally released Final Fantasy X-2. I believe it was in 2002 or 2003, which was, I think, the first direct sequel to a Final Fantasy game that was actually ever released. And while most people don't think too highly of it, some people do. And it has since been, re-referenced and things like that, and has been part of, or at least included in Final Fantasy X re-releases in the time since. And that's great. But certainly by the time the PlayStation 3 came out, everybody just kept saying, oh, man, it would be so great to see Final Fantasy VII done on like HD console with like HD graphics, remastered graphics. And that was true back then, even as far back as like the PS, when the PS3 was first shown, not even when the PS3 was first released. To later on, of course, throughout the PlayStation 4's lifespan, until in 2015 they finally announced that they would re-release it. But some people don't remember that in the early aughts, let's say around 2003 or so, Square Enix did give up a little bit of control, in that they decided not to come back with a re-release or a remaster, but that they would release subsequent new titles that would take place in the Final Fantasy VII universe. 4 games, or 4 titles, I should say, 4 pieces of media would be released, and they were calling it the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. Now, of those 4, I already talked about one of them, Final Fantasy VII Advent Children. That was a home media release, basically, a film, a standalone film, taking place after the events of Final Fantasy VII as a bit of a coda to that story. And a lot of people don't. That came out in 2005 in the United States. A lot of people don't remember this, but actually, it was extremely big deal when that DVD release came out. They released it on both DVD and UMD, and I sincerely to this day regret not getting the UMD version. Although I did get the movie on DVD, and it has since been re-released on like Blu-ray and 4K, and it's probably available. The 4K release is probably available on your various streaming services, such as like Apple TV, for example. So there's opportunities for you to get it. But there were three others. One of them was the beloved PSP game Crisis Core. That, of course, has also been re-released as like, I think it's been re-released as like a Switch game. I think it's on the Switch and the PlayStation 5 at the very least. So Crisis Core, not lost media. The third game in that list, number 3, is the PS2 game Dirge of Cerberus, Final Fantasy VII, starring Vincent Valentine. That game has not been reprinted. However, that stayed in print for a very long time. So you probably could be able to find it, no problem. It is a PS2 exclusive as far as I remember. But yeah, that game is still pretty ubiquitous. I remember picking it up no problem when I had a PS, back in like 2012. So that was cool. But did you know that there was a fourth game? A fourth game. That fourth game was called Before Crisis. And it has the rare double whammy that makes it as part of this lost media video. The first whammy to it is that it never saw a release outside of Japan. And it was dependent upon a central server for absolutely no reason I can think of whatsoever. And that server in Japan has since been shut down. And now, even if you had played it or paid for it, that game unfortunately has not been playable since 2018. And it never got a re-release, either in Japan or outside of Japan. Although that game, Before Crisis, is considered canonical events to the story of Final Fantasy VII, and is even partially referenced in Advent Children. So what was Before Crisis? Before Crisis was an episodic, you don't hear me saying that game that too much recently, was an episodic game released in several chapters for Japanese non-smart cell phones. Most people would probably argue that the revolution of the smartphones did not come until probably around the second generation iPhone came out, the iPhone 3G. That was 2008. Although the original iPhone could do most of the functions of the iPhone 3G. And but yeah, it took them about a year before the functionality that was necessary to bring in, that kind of release did not come until about a year afterwards. So let's say 2008 in the United States. And then, of course, there was subsequent, other handhelds that came out after that, like Android phones and things like that. And that's fine. But again, this was 2008, 2009. Before then, it was flip phones. And before then, it was non-flip phones that could play Snake. And before then, it was cell phones the size of a brick with an antenna as thick as your finger. And probably as long as your hand. That's all we got in the United States. And I remember for the longest time, a lot of the carriers, especially in the United States, to their detriment, of course, did everything they could to hold back cell phone innovations, just because they didn't want to pay for it, or they didn't want to lose profit about it. And they only relented because they were forced to when Steve Jobs threw his weight around. And the world is probably a better place for that in general, because but again, 2003, 2004, you were stuck with a phone that maybe could do when you flipped it open, you may be able to make a text message. It would take you forever to type out that message with the limited keyboard you had. It might be able to play a Java game badly because of the poor processor. And yeah, that was what you had in the United States. Square Enix was planning on doing a wide release in, worldwide, of this RPG visual novel, which had incredible art style that was heavily inspired by like anime and manga and things like that, where you would basically take place several months to several years before the events of Final Fantasy VII and focus on the story of the Turks. You will be playing newly initiated Turks, basically, and each chapter would probably have like a different focus on a different character, but you would be interacting with canonical characters in the Final Fantasy, seven, franchise, just before they became the known characters that we know of them as by the time that Final Fantasy VII came out, or by the time of Final Fantasy VII. And that's all I can really tell you about it. Again, the game has not been re-released. I think there might be a fan translation out there, but even I admit, from what I saw from this stuff, and it's incomplete. It's only based on whatever gameplay was recorded and shown, and screenshots were taken and stuff like that. Like basically it was based upon, like, the art style and stuff was based upon the off-screen, takings of gameplay. It's not based on like the game's code or the original game script or anything. And Square Enix has not planned, or nor do they plan right now, subsequently, to re-release it in any form on modern smartphones, even though smartphones could handle it and probably have been able to handle it for at least the last decade and a half, at least. It's lost, and nobody remembers it. In fact, the only reason why I remember it, to be honest with you, is because I remember covering E3. I can't remember if it was 2003 or 2004. It was either my first or my second E3. One of the best times I ever had back then, when I was just starting my gaming journalism and stuff like that. So I was at E3, and I was at the Square Enix booth. And I remember one of the pamphlets. I remember finding a pamphlet in the or being passed one, and in it was a roadmap that they were passing out with all the upcoming games that they were working on. And part of that pamphlet included the compilation of Final Fantasy VII. It was the announcement of that compilation. And in there was Before Crisis in English. And it never came to be. I wish I could still find that pamphlet. It might be at my old house still. But yeah, that pamphlet included plans for United States release. And from what I've been told, the only reason it didn't come out over here was because the cell phones sucked at the time. And they decided to give up on it about 2 years before the iPhone 3G came out, and the iTunes store came out, for cell phones and stuff. The App Store. It was 2 years before the App Store launched. Just before. So that's a regret that I have. Hopefully, if Square Enix is watching this, they decide to actually re-release re-release it. I'd be fine playing it on like an iPad or something like that. Heck, release it on Vision Pro. Until next time, guys, my name is Maniac with GameAccess.net. Take care. Over and out.